Hey everybody, it's Ron, and I want to tell you a story about business and how that story changed everything. If you were around when this event happened, those sounds probably just did something to you. Maybe it's the sound of a Tuesday afternoon in a school computer lab. Maybe it's a living room, a new beige tower smelling faintly of plastic and cardboard, your dad reading the manual out loud like it was going to make sense the second time through. Whatever the memory is, it's probably a good one. Curiosity, a little bit of wonder, the sense that something in your house had just quietly gotten a lot more interesting. By the summer of 1995, that planned feeling had a release date attached to it, and a company by the name of Microsoft had spent the better part of a year making sure the entire country knew it. Magazine covers ran countdown clocks. The Empire State Building in New York City was scheduled to light up in the software's own colors. In London, an entire issue of the London Times was reportedly given away free, wrapped around a promotional insert for the release of the software. People who had never once been excited about an operating system found themselves genuinely curious about one anyway, because somehow this one had stopped feeling like a spreadsheet update and started feeling like an event. Electronics stores prepared for midnight lines the way they might for a movie premiere. Employees who spent years selling beige boxes to mildly annoyed customers were bracing for something closer to a concert crowd. Nobody quite knew yet whether a piece of software called Windows 95 could actually earn that kind of anticipation, or whether it was all just very expensive noise. What would it take to make an operating system feel less like a tool and more like a party? Could a company really convince ordinary people to line up at midnight for something they couldn't even hold in their hands? And how did all of that anticipation finally arrive on August 24th, 1995, the day the waiting was actually over for the release of Microsoft's Windows 95 software? From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast where we explain the stories that changed business forever. Every date on the calendar has a story where business reshaped the world. Today, August 24th, that story takes us to 1995, missing the start of something. For 3 years, a small army of engineers inside Microsoft had been building something under a code name that gave away nothing. It was called Chicago. Founder Bill Gates had one belief driving nearly every decision they made, and it wasn't really about code at all. He wanted a person sitting down at a computer for the first time to feel the same ease they felt reaching for a television remote, not the dread of a manual they'd have to read twice. So his team built a button. One word, printed plainly in the corner of the screen. Start. Everything else, a taskbar tracking open programs along the bottom edge, a new file browser called Windows Explorer, existed to support that single idea, that a computer should feel like something you simply switch on, not something you have to learn. Down the hall from where that work was going on, a different team was solving a stranger problem. How do you make an intimidating machine feel like it actually belongs to the person sitting in front of it? Their answer became Microsoft Plus, which was a separate package released that same day right alongside Windows 95. The Plus package was something a customer could buy on top of the operating system itself, and it offered 12 entirely different personalities a user could drop onto their desktop. Jungle themes, sports themes, science themes, each one arriving with its own wallpaper, its own cursor, and its own set of sounds, distinct from the handful of default sounds baked into Windows 95 itself, the ones you heard at the top of the episode. Somewhere in a sound lab, engineers were literally recording chirping birds and umpires shouting, "Play ball," so that a stranger's computer could greet them with noises that felt like fun instead of function. It was the exact same argument as the start button, just wearing a different costume. By the time both pieces were finished, Microsoft's leadership made a decision that had nothing to do with engineering at all. They committed roughly $30 million to convince the public that a piece of software deserved to feel like an event. On the night of August 24th, 1995, thousands of people packed onto Microsoft's own campus in Redmond, Washington, and comedian Jay Leno stood at a podium cracking jokes about a product he was, by his own admission on stage, only barely qualified to understand. Satellite feeds carried the whole spectacle to launch parties in dozens of cities around the world, a shared moment happening simultaneously on nearly every continent. Behind the scenes, a guitar riff most of the crowd already knew by heart was playing through every commercial break. The Rolling Stones' "Start Me Up," licensed for a reported $3 million because Gates himself had noticed how neatly the lyric echoed his new button. Rumors swirled for years afterward that the real price tag had been $10 or $12 million instead, a number some insiders believed the band itself had happily let spread, quietly inflating their own future asking price. A full continent away in New York City, spotlight technicians aimed floodlights up the side of the Empire State Building, ready to bathe it in Windows 95's own logo colors, red and yellow and green, lit up on schedule. The blue lights never came on. In London, delivery trucks fanned out before dawn, carrying 1.5 million copies of the London Times, printed and given away completely free because Microsoft had quietly paid for the entire run, wrapping the paper in a front-page banner and advertising supplement touting Windows 95. The 307-year-old newspaper had never once given away an issue's run in its entire history until that morning. Outside electronics stores worldwide, lines started forming well before midnight. Strangers standing shoulder to shoulder the way they might outside a concert venue, waiting for doors to open for a cardboard box instead of a stage. By the time the dust settled, 5 weeks later, 7 million of those boxes had sold. Somewhere inside Microsoft that exact same week, engineers were quietly wrestling with a problem the celebration outside never mentioned. The original Windows 95 software shipped without a web browser built into the operating system itself. A version did exist, Internet Explorer 1.0, but only inside that separate Windows 95 Plus pack, an add-on almost nobody bought at first. That meant that the base Windows 95 platform most of the world actually installed had no way to browse the web at all. That gap wasn't a blind spot, though, and getting the timeline right here matters more than almost anything else in this story. Way back on May 26th, 3 months before that party in Redmond and around the world, Bill Gates had already sat down and written an internal memo to his own executive staff. He titled it the Internet Tidal Wave. In it, he warned in blunt, 5-alarm language that the Internet was about to upend everything his company had spent a decade building. He'd seen it coming clearly in writing well before a single copy of Windows 95 reached a store shelf. What he hadn't seen coming back in May was how little that realization could actually change in 3 months. As they closed in on the August release of Windows 95, they had already been through a 3-year development cycle, had already locked the software in its final shape, and couldn't simply rebuild it around a browser overnight just because the man at the top had changed his mind about where the industry was headed. So, Microsoft did the only thing left available to it. Immediately following the launch, they scrambled to pull that browser out of the niche add-on pack that wasn't selling very well and put it directly into the operating system itself by using a free update download called OSR1, becoming the first version of Windows to actually include it, with real competitive strength only arriving a couple of versions later. 1 billion people would eventually learn exactly what that start button meant. The sound, the click, the sense that this was where everything on their computer began. At the very moment they were learning it, the company behind that button had already missed the start of something else entirely, a shift its own founder had spotted months earlier and still couldn't turn the ship around in time to meet. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the podcast that finds the turning points behind the headlines. To hear more stories like this, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the stories, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And if you want to actually understand business better without the fluff, the buzzwords, or the MBA language, start by visiting businessdailypodcast.com.